Charles-Maurice de Talleyrand-Périgord was born not merely into nobility, but into the kind of ancient aristocratic lineage that made other noble families feel insecure. The House of Périgord, a dynasty so old that its ancestors were already powerful when Charlemagne was still in short pants. This was a family that had produced crusaders, marshals, bishops, cardinals, generals, and grand officers for 1,000 years. They operated on the assumption that France belonged to them by default, and that kings merely rented the throne from the Périgords. Into this world of arrogance, powdered dignity, and genealogical vanity was born a small, fragile, limping child in 1754, destined to become the most brilliant and dangerous political mind Europe had ever produced. His clubfoot ensured he would never be a soldier, a devastating humiliation for a family that worshipped the sword almost as much as they worshipped themselves. So, seeking to hide the embarrassment, they pushed him toward the church. There, they thought, he could live quietly, elegantly, harmlessly. Instead, they accidentally created a fox disguised as a bishop, a priest who believed more in power than in God, and whose sharp mind would eventually outlive kings, revolutions, empires, and betrayals without ever losing its balance. Talleyrand climbed the church hierarchy with suspicious ease. He became Bishop of Autun in 1788, scandalizing even Rome, because although he wore vestments, everyone who knew him understood that his heart beat not for Christ, but for influence. As bishop, he made one of his earliest and boldest heretical moves. He began granting episcopal consecrations to priests whom the Pope had explicitly rejected. This was more than disobedience. It was an act of ecclesiastical rebellion. Talleyrand believed France should choose its own bishops without papal interference. The Vatican disagreed. The Pope threatened censure and even excommunication. France gasped. Bishops protested, but Talleyrand smiled, wrote polite letters explaining the necessity of national autonomy, and continued consecrating bishops anyway. He had the rare ability to break fundamental rules while appearing perfectly correct, even courteous. Rome vowed revenge. Talleyrand continued climbing. Then came 1789, the revolution, the moment when France decided to rebuild itself by dismantling everything around it. The Estates General met, summoning the traditional three orders: the clergy, First Estate; the nobility, Second Estate; and the common people, Third Estate. Everyone expected Talleyrand, ancient noble and bishop, to stand firmly with his class. Instead, he calmly crossed the aisle and joined the Third Estate. The room exploded, nobles shouted, bishops nearly fainted. It was as if the Pope had converted to atheism mid-sermon. Europe was stunned. France was electrified. The Third Estate cheered, because having a Périgord join their cause was like having Excalibur fall into the hands of peasants. The aristocracy howled at his treason. The people praised his courage. Talleyrand simply remarked, "I go where reason leads me." Thus began betrayal number one. The moment he betrayed the First Estate, the aristocracy, his family, and centuries of tradition, with a graceful step and a polite smile. He then delivered one of his most destructive proposals, nationalizing church property. Centuries of ecclesiastical wealth, monasteries, abbeys, dioceses, all to be seized by the state to pay France's debts. The clergy screamed sacrilege. Talleyrand counted revenues. It passed. Overnight, he became the most hated bishop in the Catholic world and one of the most valuable politicians in France. Louis XVI, bewildered, sought his counsel. Talleyrand provided it, gently, intelligently, but always in a way that deepened the monarchy's confusion. He calmed the king by day, warned the revolutionaries by night, and positioned himself so that whichever side survived, Talleyrand would survive as well. Betrayal. Number 2, sabotaging the monarchy with the precision of a surgeon, removing a tumor he himself had diagnosed. When the king attempted to flee to Varennes and was caught, Talleyrand expressed shock with Oscar-worthy skill, though he had predicted the catastrophe long before the horses were even saddled. Then came the terror, the guillotine roaring like an industrial machine. Heads rolled, blood-filled gutters. Paris became a carnival of hysteria and ideology. Talleyrand, who possessed the strongest survival instinct in Europe, made the most rational decision of the decade. He left, first London, then America. In the United States, he charmed George Washington, drank good Madeira, learned American finance, consulted merchants, seduced several influential women, and observed democracy like an anthropologist studying a strange tribe practicing politics without bloodshed. Americans adored him because he was witty, elegant, mysterious, and slightly dangerous, everything Americans thought Europeans were supposed to be. After Robespierre fell, he returned to France in 1796, slipping back into Paris as if he had merely stepped out for fresh air. France was exhausted, disillusioned, and desperate for competence, perfect conditions for Talleyrand. Then he met Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon saw a brilliant advisor. Talleyrand saw a comet, bright, fast, destined to burn out, and perfect to ride until the moment of disintegration. Napoleon made him foreign minister. Talleyrand became the empire's brain. While Napoleon marched armies, Talleyrand forged alliances, manipulated monarchs, wrote treaties, and shaped Europe with sentences sharp enough to pierce armor. But as Napoleon grew arrogant, Spain, Russia, endless wars, Talleyrand recognized the classic trajectory of a man destined to fall from a great height. So he positioned himself accordingly. Betrayal. Number 3, quietly withdrawing emotional and political support. Betrayal number 4, actively conspiring with France's enemies while still serving Napoleon. He whispered to Tsar Alexander the First, "Be patient, the emperor will destroy himself." He soothed Austria, "Your moment will come." He encouraged Britain, pressure him economically. He even suggested to Prussia when to strike. This was treason executed with the grace of a ballet dancer. When Napoleon discovered it, he famously said, "You are shit in a silk stocking." Talleyrand responded, "It seems His Majesty has examined himself," thus winning history's gold medal for diplomatic insults. In 1814, Paris fell. Napoleon abdicated, and Talleyrand stepped into the power vacuum like a man stepping into warm water. He opened his mansion to the coalition leaders, formed a provisional government, and invited back the Bourbons. Louis XVI entered Paris in triumph, unaware that the same Talleyrand had helped dismantle the Bourbon monarchy decades earlier. Talleyrand bowed. "Sire," he said, "I never ceased to serve the crown." Whether or not the crown agreed is irrelevant. The crown needed him. Then came the Congress of Vienna, Talleyrand's masterpiece. France was defeated, humiliated, and politically crippled, but Talleyrand walked into that hall filled with emperors and kings and said, essentially, "Gentlemen, let me explain your mistakes." His argument was brilliant. Decisions should be based not on who won, but on legitimacy, a concept that conveniently put France back on equal footing with the victors. He exploited every rivalry in the room. Austria feared Russia. Russia distrusted Britain. Prussia hated everyone. Britain mistrusted everyone. Talleyrand navigated this chaos like a maestro conducting an orchestra of egos. He flattered Metternich's intellect, seduced Alexander the First with philosophical discussions, soothed Castlereagh with promises of balance, and outmaneuvered Hardenberg so thoroughly that Prussia barely realized it had lost half its leverage. Talleyrand transformed defeated France into the moral center of Europe, a nation whose voice mattered because Talleyrand made it matter. This was political resurrection on a biblical scale. Betrayal. Number 5, betraying the idea of national humiliation by refusing to allow it and boosting his own power above all. After Vienna, he served Louis XVI, then Charles X, then Louis Philippe, because loyalty was for amateurs. He died in 1838 at the age of 84, the only man of his era who survived the church, the monarchy, the revolution, the terror, Napoleon, the Restoration, and every political faction he ever betrayed. He confessed his sins for hours. The priest fainted repeatedly. It changed nothing. Talleyrand regretted nothing, and history grudgingly admitted he had been right about almost everything, because he was not loyal to kings or revolution or France. He was loyal to intelligence, stability, and survival. and in that, he was the most faithful man Europe ever had.